Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Wind chill values in the -15 to -20 range in the Fraser Valley.
How people living on the streets are bracing for an Arctic blast. Also,
at the moment, it feels an awful lot like we're being forced to choose between our health and our kids' education.
Parents seek an extension to a learning option for vulnerable students they say keeps their families safe. And
this is the Hong Kong passport. This is my Canadian passport.
China or Canada? The difficult choice facing dual passport holders in Hong Kong.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. Well, here it comes. That blast of cold Arctic air is on its way.
As temperatures will be the lowest we've had this winter in Metro Vancouver and, well, in the Valley, even colder. As Susanna De Silva reports tonight, combined with COVID restrictions, shelters say they're feeling the pressure to keep the homeless safe.
We have 250, actually, I think, believe it or not, we have 300 toques. And we have about 200 blankets.
Gregory Old has been going non-stop delivering supplies to local shelters.
When the cold hits, we get a lot more calls saying, hey, just in case, can we get 20 more blankets or 40 more blankets or even 100 more blankets, and we will be there.
He started Blanket BC 15 years ago. So far, they've given out 500,000 blankets, 20,000 of them this winter alone. Knowing it may be some people's only warmth, unable to get into a shelter because of space restrictions or fear.
A lot of the challenges are coming directly from the street survivors themselves. They don't want to put themselves at even more risk by going into a shelter where they could catch something.
This first blast of Arctic air this winter with temperatures 5 to 10 degrees below seasonal will be a test for shelters.
Toques, obviously, for people who are chilly.
The Union Gospel Mission will have teams out offering supplies and will likely see their expanded space at capacity.
We saw during the fall and early winter that our turnaway numbers were way higher than previous years. And so we actually converted space in one of our classrooms into a shelter space so that we could maintain our capacity during the cold weather during the winter of about 92 beds. So 72 on our shelter and then 20 extra spaces.
He says the cold itself is not the only risk, as people may try dangerous ways to keep themselves warm. A person experiencing homelessness died last month in North Vancouver in a fire believed to have been started while trying to stay warm.
The need rose because of the pandemic, and then the cold weather comes, and then you need more space. So it's just complication on top of complication. And it's easy for people to miss that these are humans, neighbors, valuable people who are in a really bad spot, and we can help and be a part of partnering with them and as they get out of it.
The Fraser Valley could see temperatures as low as -20 this week, a test for shelters there, including one that already saw an outbreak at the beginning of the year.
We feel it's better to have them inside and perish than the risk and let them have the risk of getting COVID than perish outside in the sub-zero weathers.
They are hopeful vaccinations may help.
Just about everyone that we know of and everybody that wanted it has had a needle, their first round of needles.
Everyone working to make sure COVID doesn't make this cold blast a deadly one. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
All right, let's bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe now. Getting chilly out there, Joe. Anita's already parkas and scarves and
I did bring my shawl to work today and I was wrapped up.
I remember Anita shawl days. Yes, the real thermostat. It's true, though. I think that was a good call. This is only going to get colder as that Arctic air mass really sinks in across not just the south coast, but the whole province. And we do have extreme cold warnings in place for central BC. I want to take you to pictures out of Prince George from earlier today. It was a gorgeous day, but temperatures struggling to get much above the minus double digits. Wind chills through the day, -30, and through the early morning and overnight hours, well, some people are enjoying it, as some animals, I should say, -45 wind chills. So this is why we are under the warning for parts of the province. Frostbite can set in a matter of minutes. But if you are bundled up and don't mind a frozen mustache or frozen eyelashes. It certainly is gorgeous for Prince George. Let me take you through the wind chills right now. Look at the numbers. These are just the wind chills. Quesnel, Prince George, -31 right now, and dropping as we get those outflow winds kick in, a -10 in through Hope. So temperatures certainly the big part of our story because they are expected to stick around through to the weekend. We have a special weather statement in place for Metro Vancouver for those cold temperatures that will be dropping over the next couple of nights. Wind chills for us in the -10 range. Mike and Anita, there's another side to the story, and that's the snow. I'm tracking that system sliding down from the north. We could see some accumulating snow tomorrow morning, and there's 2 more chances before the weekend, so those details coming up.
Looking forward to finding out more. Thanks, Johanna.
You're welcome.
Well, their children have health conditions that put them at greater risk of COVID-19 complications.
Now, a group of parents is asking the Vancouver School Board for an extension to a learning option they've had during the pandemic.
As Liam Britton reports, they say it has provided their kids an education while keeping their families safe.
I would prefer to be back in school, but I'm glad that I'm at home for safety and stuff.
For Kate and Zoe Martins, moving back to in-class learning in Vancouver means their mom might move away.
I have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and it would not be safe for our kids to go to school right now and possibly bring home COVID-19. I would have to move to the island to be with my mom.
Kate and Zoe are in what's called Option 4 for now.
When schools reopened in September, Vancouver parents of elementary school-age kids had a multiple-choice question. Do they send their kids back to in-class learning? Do they homeschool them? Do they go to online learning, which loses their place in their schools and programs? Or Option 4. That's a temporary transitional program. Kids' spots in their schools and programs are held for them while they do online learning. But Option 4 is ending at the end of the month, and that means parents and students have a choice. Do they stick with online learning and lose their spots in their programs and schools? Or do they go back to in-class learning despite some families' safety misgivings?
Okay, that's looking really good.
As of January, there were over 2,700 kids in Option 4. The Martins are hoping the Vancouver School Board extends the option until the pandemic ends, so they don't have to be split apart.
At the moment, it feels an awful lot like we're being forced to choose between our health and our kids' education.
Jacqueline Ferrer lives with a rare lung disease that puts her at higher risk of COVID complications. She has 2 kids in Option 4, but doesn't want them to lose their place in Hastings Elementary's French immersion program. So she is sending them back reluctantly.
And that just seems unjust because we feel we shouldn't have to make that choice.
Health officials have repeatedly stressed that schools are safe, and while there have been exposures, outbreaks have been few and far between, but these high-risk parents want to see vaccines roll out before sending their kids back. The VSB is holding a meeting Wednesday with an update on the future of Option 4, so like many pupils at crunch time, these parents are asking for an extension. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
And there have been 4 new COVID-19 related deaths for a total of 1,263 deaths now in British Columbia. Since yesterday's update, 435 more cases have been confirmed. BC's total case count is now over 71,000. Just under 4,400 of those cases are active. 241 people are in hospital, with 68 of them in critical or ICU. And as BC makes gradual progress on those numbers, the threat of more infectious coronavirus variants is looming large. And we got a unique look today inside the province's effort to fight them. This lab tests for COVID-19 and also performs genome sequencing on patient samples to test for the presence of variants. It is facilities like this one that will give British Columbians a clearer idea of how prevalent the variants are in our communities and how fast they're spreading.
And word from Health Canada tonight that it's now going to allow a 6th dose to be taken from each vial of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The approval lets the drug maker relabel the vials originally meant for 5 doses.
Based on its assessment, Health Canada has determined that each vial will reliably contain 6 doses of vaccine plus sufficient overfill volume when proper technique is used.
A special syringe is needed to extract all of the vaccine in each bottle without wastage. Canada has already received its first order of those syringes, with more expected in the coming weeks. As part of the approval, Pfizer has to provide educational support to administration sites in Canada.
Well, soon all non-essential travelers coming into Canada, even through a land border, will need to show a negative COVID-19 test.
As of February 15th, when you return to Canada through a land border, you'll need to show a 72-hour PCR test, just like for air travel.
The Prime Minister says legally, Canadians can't be turned away at the border, but those who show up without proof of a test could face fines of up to $3,000. Air travelers are already required to show proof of a negative PCR test 3 days before their flight back to Canada. This is in addition to the mandatory 14-day quarantine period for all non-essential travelers.
And with the growing concern about variants and the COVID-19 vaccine's effectiveness, you might have some questions. Joining us a little later in this newscast to answer your COVID-19 questions is BC's Deputy Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Reka Gustafson. You can email those to bcasks@cbc.ca right now, or you can even give us a phone call, 604-662-6801. Remember to keep those questions brief so we can ask her as many as possible tonight. If you're watching online this evening, feel free to leave your question in the comments section of the live stream.
Okay, some relief today for self-employed Canadians caught up in the confusion of pandemic benefits.
As Catherine Cullen tells us, some people who got CERB benefits when the rules weren't clear will not have to pay the money back.
It's a good day for Alison Griffiths. After months of anxiety, she thought this moment might never come.
I'm absolutely thrilled. There are so many struggling self-employed individuals out there who now have just this huge load off their chest.
She was one of 441,000 Canadians who got a letter from the CRA late last year saying she might have to repay her Canada Emergency Response benefit.
In my new book,
Griffiths wrote a book on personal finance, so she was pretty surprised to hear the problem came down to how self-employment income was defined. Gross income or net?
when I got the letter, I thought that there was a mistake, actually.
And it wasn't just her. Her husband, her adult daughter, on the hook for $14,000 each, she says. The situation got messier later in December. The union representing CRA employees said workers had been given the wrong information about self-employment income and shared it with callers for about 3 weeks.
At the beginning, when people were phoning, unfortunately, there was a mistake made.
Today, the Prime Minister said those caught up by the definition of self-employment income are off the hook.
As long as you meet the other eligibility criteria, you will not have to return those CERB payments.
Anyone who is already repaid will get their money back as soon as possible, officials say.
I confess I would like to have heard, we made a mistake and we've decided to fix it, but, maybe that's asking for too much.
She calls it a backtrack by the government. One minister said it's a course correction.
We are dealing here with a subset of the 9 million Canadians who applied for CERB, who legitimately and honestly relied on misinformation we provided, and that's the problem we're solving here today.
The cost and the number of people affected is something the government says it's still sorting out. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, he was a father, a bridge player, and according to his family, a fighter since birth. Galen Tad Fetterly was a beloved member of the Tri-Cities community.
His family is in mourning after his death earlier this year. And as John Hernandez reports, Fetterly is one of 6 people who died following a COVID-19 outbreak inside the Nicola Lodge care home.
You could say Galen Tad Fetterly spent his life defying the odds.
My grandmother was told he was a stillborn, and the doctor apparently put him aside on the oven door, and a few hours later he cried. And that was just sort of my dad. He had like 9 lives.
Close calls, like when he was 3 months old and survived a major surgery, or when he was a kid and took a rock to the temple.
So he was actually like in bed for a week. The best part of that for him though was that his Uncle Smokey brought him a 6-pack of Coke. And he was so excited about that 6-pack of Coke that he got.
His family gave him the nickname Tadpole because of how he'd wiggle around in bed. And it stuck.
My dad's name, his whole life has been Tad. He does not go by Galen.
A tadpole that grew up to get married and start a family. He moved from the prairies to BC with his wife Birdie in the 70s and started a career in the signage industry. They had 3 kids, and he always found a way to get involved.
He was always there, soccer, softball. It's not like he played soccer his whole life. He never played soccer in his life, but he coached me, and he did a wonderful job. He painted a whole bunch of triptychs.
His love of art bestowed upon his kids.
So I took art, I really wanted to take it, did not like the teacher. And I came home at the end of grade 8 and said, Dad, I do not want to take art 9, and he was absolutely adamant that I continue in art. So I signed back up for it. He went to the parent-teacher night. He came home and told me I didn't have to do art anymore.
He spent his retirement years painting and playing cards. He moved into the Nicola Lodge care home in Port Moody about 5 years ago. In December, there was a COVID-19 outbreak. Tad was one of 6 people who died.
For him to be by himself in the hospital, that was hard. That was really hard.
Since then, an outpouring of support and grief, even from the Coquitlam mayor, who Tad used to volunteer for.
He had lots still to offer. Sad to see him go. A great community is made up of great people like Tad Fetterly.
A legacy of love, laughs, and unbridled belief in those closest to him.
He impacted people. He had an impact on people.
Tad Fetterly leaves behind a wife, 3 children, and 5 grandkids. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's provincial health officer is heading to court, seeking an injunction against churches defying her COVID-19 orders. Dr. Bonnie Henry wants 3 churches in Langley, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack to suspend religious in-person services. If granted, the injunction will allow police to detain anyone they believe is planning to attend a gathering. A petition filed by the churches last month claimed Dr. Henry is violating constitutional rights of expression and religious worship. The case is being heard on Friday.
Well, over the weekend, fines totaling close to $6,000 were issued after police shut down an illegal nightclub in Surrey.
Inside the club were approximately 22 individuals, and those individuals were issued 26 violation tickets, and these tickets were each for $230.
Police executed a search warrant early Saturday morning on a property on King George Boulevard in Whalley. Those inside were each fined for attending an event currently banned under public health orders. Mounties say officers have visited the same location on other occasions. The alleged host of the event has been ordered to appear in court at a later date.
Well, the CEO of Provincial Health Services Authority is out of the job tonight on the same day a report into alleged misspending became public. It follows an exclusive CBC report that brought forward concerns from whistleblowers inside the organization.
The PHSA board decided today, and I think correctly, and I support them in their decision, to part ways with Mr. Morin.
Benoit Morin was dismissed without cause, so he will still receive 9-month severance. He was hired in February of 2020 with a salary of $352,000 a year. CBC brought forward the allegations at the end of last year involving several of Morin's decisions.
They included the misspending of millions of dollars on unusable masks, unnecessary renovations, and high-end catered meals. A report commissioned by the BC government found the recent dismissals of several PHSA executives were in part to friction with Morin.
Well, Vancouver's most popular sports radio station, TSN 1040, suddenly went off the air this morning. At 9:30 a.m., the morning show cut away for a commercial break and then announced that the station would be reprogrammed as of Friday. The unceremonious shuttering caught both staff and listeners off guard. TSN 1040 launched 20 years ago as Team 1040 and was the longest running and most popular of the 2 sports radio stations here in Vancouver. The station is reportedly switching to a comedy format. This comes after recent weeks of Bell Media laying off hundreds of people at its radio and TV stations across Canada.
And more staff and route cuts at Air Canada to tell you about tonight. Another 1,500 workers will soon be out of jobs across the country. Canada's biggest airline is also suspending service on major routes. Starting next week, flights from Vancouver to Seattle, Tokyo, and London, England are being cut. That's along with service on 14 more routes in Canada to international destinations. The suspension is temporary and will last till April 30th, but could be extended.
The Canadian government is warning dual citizens in Hong Kong about a new hard line from Chinese officials.
Pressure has been on some detainees to give up their Canadian citizenship.
And as Tanya Fletcher tells us, that's sparking concern from BC dual citizens and politicians alike.
Hong Kong passport, this is my Canadian passport.
A proud dual citizen, Kevin Chong, is unnerved by the idea of being forced to choose one nationality over the other. But open that Canadian passport to the back inside cover, and you'll find this long-standing disclaimer to dual citizens. Be aware that your Canadian citizenship may not be recognized by the country of your other nationality, it says, which could jeopardize the right to consular protection from Canada. And that's exactly what happened last month to a Canadian dual citizen serving a prison sentence in Hong Kong. And there have been more cases since, says Canada's Consul General in Hong Kong.
This is a new practice that's being applied here. So these are things, developments that we find very concerning.
China doesn't recognize dual citizens, and technically neither does Hong Kong. The law has been on the books in the region since 1997, but hasn't been enforced until now. And it's not just Canadians. Others are being targeted too.
And we are now working with those other countries to raise these issues at the highest levels with the Hong Kong government and with the central government of China.
Ask why now, and many observers will take you back to these moments. The pro-democracy protests, seen by many as a direct threat to Beijing.
It's concerning because we know that Hong Kong has changed. You can see that the government is becoming less and less tolerant to dissent.
So far, only dual citizens who've been detained have been forced to choose a primary nationality. But Shin doesn't think it will stop there. He believes the uncertainty alone could prompt a new wave of migration to Canada.
Well, most people are talking about it quietly. But
Edward Chin is a dual citizen who returned to Hong Kong more than 20 years ago. He says a gradual anxiety has been rising there. And if given an ultimatum,
I would choose freedoms, definitely. Freedoms and democracy. Who wants to live in a place where there's no freedoms?
The choice for him an easy one, but to a decision he hopes he never has to make. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
And of course, a reminder, you can always watch our newscasts live on CBC Gem.
And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram.
Secret recordings suggest we may never know the truth about a Ukraine Airlines plane downed by missiles last year over Iran. After the break, we'll tell you why. Thank you, as always, for staying with us during our live, commercial-free live stream.
Yes, kite surfing, normally a popular sport in warmer places, but a few brave souls in Newfoundland have been spending their weekends catching wind in the frigid Atlantic Ocean.
The small crew rides the waves year-round, no matter how cold it gets. Take a look.
I'm Peter, we're about to go kite surfing. I was down south in Florida and I seen two guys ripping by on the beach. I said, that's cool, I want to do that. So I bought some gear online, I came out, I joined this great group of kiteboarders here, and I just took off from there.
Now, Newfoundland and Labrador is not Florida.
Well, it's a lot more gear, for sure, as you can tell, but we definitely have the wind for it, so it's great.
If you have skis or a snowboard lying around at home, all you need is a kite and a harness, and you can go out in the winter and cruise around in fields or up mountains and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's just basically like an engine, using the wind, and you can kind of power a bunch of different activities.
It's actually a lot on feeling. You know, I mean, there's a lot of physics and science behind it, but really you just kind of put your kite in the air, look the way you want to go, and you're in a relaxed position and you just go with it. And these guys are amazing. Like, they're incredibly active, they're incredibly supportive, and they're incredibly tough. Like, where I'm from, we don't do this in the winter. I mean, we'll do it, but on ice or on snow. We're not in the ocean in the winter, so these guys are really tough.
Beautiful. When you get launched in the air, everything goes silent. You're focused on the kite, focused just flying through the air. So blissful, so nice.
Looks fun, but
Sure.
no thank you.
Well, if I could stay a few meters off the water, it would be okay. Not any higher, though. It's
Oh yeah, you have a height thing.
too much, really. And the cold. Don't even get me started on that.
I have a cold thing, you have a heights thing. We're not doing
So
it.
we're not going kite surfing in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, coming up, more national and international news. Don't forget, coming up in about 5 or 6 minutes, taking your questions to Deputy Provincial Health Officer Dr. Johanna Wagstaffe. Be sure to get those in right now. Until then, enjoy the view of downtown Vancouver on this Tuesday night. CBC News has heard a recording of a man sources identify as Iran's foreign minister. In it, the man acknowledges the downing of Flight 752 with many Canadians on board could have been intentional.
We are protecting the identity of the source out of concern for their safety. Ashley Burke has an exclusive look now at what the recording reveals.
For 13 months, the question has been, could this have been intentional? A voice that sources identified as Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs says on a secret recording it is possible. Mohammad Javad Zarif says Iran's military wing, the Revolutionary Guard which shot the plane down, could have been infiltrated, for example. He's heard saying privately, even if you assume that it was an organized, intentional act, they would never tell us or anyone else. There would have been 2-3 people who did this, and it's not at all unlikely. They could have been infiltrators. There are 1,000 possibilities. Then goes on to say Iran's highest levels of the government and military would never reveal the truth. They won't tell us nor anyone else because if they do, it will open some doors into the defense systems of the country that will not be in the interest of the nation to publicly say. Some call the recording a significant new piece of evidence.
It's not clear why he would have said that it is not at all unlikely that it was intentional. But the fact that he sees that as a real possibility, I think should make us pause and really consider whether there's not something far more diabolical at play.
For months, Canadian authorities have been analyzing the recording's authenticity, but say the content's too sensitive, the risk too high to reveal much more.
We are examining every bit of evidence or potential evidence that becomes available with great seriousness to make sure that we're not missing anything.
I think it's another reason for us not to accept anything smaller than the truth.
Ukraine's ambassador to Canada says his country was unaware of the audio, despite the RCMP helping with its criminal investigation. If verified, he says the recording could help their case.
We do not want to see the truth being hidden behind state secrecy. We want to get to the bottom of this.
CBC's Ashley Burke reporting tonight. 3 women are speaking out about their experiences as employees for fashion mogul Peter Nygard.
Caroline Bargu shares their stories tonight, highlighting a culture of fear, intimidation, and sexual harassment.
Brenda Bournes worked as special events manager for Nygard International Partnership in 2007, but quit 10 months later after a trip to Burnaby, BC for a Nygard store opening.
While in BC, Bourne says a female boss asked her for the private cell phone numbers of 5 or 6 models for Peter Nygard. Bournes refused and said the models were 18 to 21 years old. She told her boss if Nygard wanted to contact them, he would have to go through their modeling agencies.
Bourne says her boss must have gotten someone else to get the numbers because later that night, she saw those same models hanging out on a bed on Nygard's private plane.
These are models. These are girls that they're part of an agency. This is their career. They're thinking this is their big break. That's no big break.
Brenda Bourne says months after leaving her job at Nygard, one of her former co-workers called her up for help finding another job. The woman came over and the two talked about their time at the company. The next morning, Bourne says there was a knock on her door, and she was served with this letter threatening her with a defamation lawsuit if she talked to anyone about Nygard or his company.
It was difficult to know that you're not even safe talking to a former coworker in your living room, and that's how far the power of the control went.
When Ilanka Cassano was 21, she worked as a model for Nygard International in Montreal. She says in 1988, Peter Nygard came to the showroom, and what he did in front of a group of business people still haunts her to this day.
He started touching on my ass, my bum. He started touching my thighs, going a bit between my legs. And I remember being so frozen, I just didn't know what to do. I didn't speak. I was cold like ice, and I couldn't understand. I couldn't believe nobody was saying nothing.
And I'm so pleased to be here at Fontana's Bridal Salon.
Today, Justina McCaffrey is an award-winning wedding dress designer in Ottawa, Ontario. But in the early 1980s, she interned for Peter Nygard in Los Angeles while studying fashion manufacturing in school. She says 2 months later, she was fired because she refused to have sex with Nygard. McCaffrey knows Nygard's niece, Angela Dyborn, and says she told her what happened. 37 years later, McCaffrey is still bothered by Dyborn's response.
I said, Angela, what the hell? He fired me because I wouldn't have sex with him. And, I'm pretty open with Angela. And she said, yeah, but just, you knew what you were getting into. And so that was the response, which I think is completely unacceptable.
Nygard was arrested in December and is awaiting extradition to the U.S. for allegations he sexually trafficked women and underage girls over a 25-year period. The 79-year-old fashion designer has denied the allegations and says they are all lies made up to tarnish his reputation. None of the allegations have been proven in court. Even though each of the women experienced something different, they say their time at Nygard companies has changed them. They hope by sharing their stories, they can empower others to do the same. Caroline Bargout, CBC News, Winnipeg.
All right, coming right up to answer your COVID-19 questions, we'll be joined by BC's Deputy Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Reka Gustafson. You can email those questions to bcasks@cbc.ca or give us a phone call, 604-662-6801. Remember, keep those questions on the phone brief. We can ask her as many as possible if you do that. If you're watching online tonight, feel free to leave your question in the comments section of the live stream.
Elizabeth Hopkins is living proof that life begins at 80, at least if you're as talented as Elizabeth is. Hopkins, who lives at Sturdy's Bay, sold her first painting when she was 80 years old, and she priced it at $5. Well, this year she celebrates her 90th birthday, and her work is really in big demand. They average about $1,000 now, and she paints one a week. Why were you never intimidated by the art establishment? I think so many of us at 60 or 70 would have said, goodness, I can't start to paint.
Well, I think I was until this happened, and I met all these painters at a party. And then I found when, instead of looking down on me, they treated me as though I were equal. In fact, they were extremely nice to me. And then I found how friendly they were. I've never had any difficulty. But I imagine there is jealousy, but I've just never met it.
When you're painting, does the whole image come to you before you even put brush to paper?
Sometimes it does. And quite often I sit down with a blank piece of paper in front of me and I draw a tree or something like that, and then it goes on from there. But other times it's in my mind, but not always.
Such wonderful fantasies. You were never inhibited from painting things that you thought were beautiful.
No, because I didn't think they were. I never had any difficulty about that.
You didn't think your paintings were beautiful?
Well, I didn't know all that makes it a fuss about. So if I did get a fuss made about them, I was so surprised and quite pleased, so that I wasn't intimidated. I was grateful for it. I think that's how... You see, I've never really been ambitious, and so I still think I am even now really ambitious.
Tell me about your book. It's a favorite of my daughter's.
David Robinson, the Tanton Books, the owner of Tanton Books, he came to me one day and said, "Would you like to illustrate a children's book?" And I said, "Yes, I would." And he said, I said, "Who's going to write it?" And he said, "You are." And I thought, why not? I've written plenty of children's stories, just to amuse children. And then I thought about an animal, and I thought about I'd have an animal nobody else had written about. And, you know, they've done elephants and bears, and then I suddenly thought of a cougar. So I haven't got a cougar, then I had to invent what he was going to do. It was quite easy, as a matter of fact. Easy, the writing and the illustrations. What the difficulty is making the book. Because if ever you made a book, you'll know, I won't tell you what you get into. This sort of book.
Children really love your work.
I suppose they do. I had a lot of fan letters when this book first came out.
Some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Get fairly significant outflows out of the Fraser Valley with those cold temperatures and the strong winds. That'll create some cold wind chills as well. So we can see wind chill values in the -15 to -20 range in the Fraser Valley.
In just a short time from now, temperatures are going to be the lowest we've had this winter in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. Combined with COVID restrictions, shelters say they're feeling the pressure to keep the homeless safe and warm. Some say it's safer to bring the people living on the streets inside rather than worrying about COVID.
It's disappointing because, you know, like for a lot of us, Hong Kong is a second home. We have a deep connection to it.
Global Affairs Canada is warning dual citizens in Hong Kong. They could face pressure from the Chinese authorities to renounce their Canadian citizenship, and Global Affairs says they shouldn't do that. It's becoming common for dual passport holders, if detained, to be told they have to declare just one nationality.
The option right now is technically due to end on March 1st, and we don't know what we're going to do beyond that because the pandemic is not gone.
A group of families at higher risk of COVID-19 complications wants the Vancouver School Board to extend a learning option they say keeps them safe. Option 4, as it's called, allows for elementary students to learn online while holding their seat in their pre-pandemic school. That option is set to end March 1st.
Okay, it is that time in our show. We're taking your questions tonight and putting them to BC's Deputy Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Reka Gustafson.
So if you want to ask about the growing presence of these COVID-19 variants, perhaps want more information about BC's mass vaccination clinics slated to start in March in our province, you can get in touch with us.
Dr. Reka Gustafson, thank you for being on the show tonight. Okay, let's get right to it. There have been some questions about COVID-19 vaccines and their effectiveness. So how effective are the vaccines when it comes to these new variants?
So what we know now is that the vaccines that we have licensed in Canada are highly effective against all the variants that are circulating at the moment. We do have some of the new variants, and some questions have been raised about the effectiveness of a vaccine not yet licensed in Canada. But again, We haven't seen those data yet, so we need to assess those data, not from a press release, but from our own assessment of the scientific information.
Okay, very good. On to these questions. Similar one from both Michael and Louise, asking, can one still transmit the virus even after receiving both doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine?
So that's a really good question. And again, it's one of the things that that is being looked at. One of the things we know that if you're less likely to get infected, you're less likely to transmit the virus. We also know that the fewer symptoms you have, the less likely you are to transmit the virus. Whether or not the virus is still present in your nasopharynx, we don't yet know for sure, but we know that if you're reducing the risk of infection and you're reducing the risk of symptoms, you're also reducing the risk of transmission. Whether or not it eliminates it is really the question that hasn't yet been answered. And I think it's probably a question that we're probably making a little bit too much of right now.
Okay, Dr. Gustafson, Heather says, schools look very different this year. Will they keep operating under COVID protocols until the under 18s are immunized? So will the 2021-22 school year be equally different? And I know this is interesting because right now under 18s aren't going to get immunized, right?
So you cut out a little bit, but I think what you asked me is whether or not the 2021-22 school year will be different. We are really hoping that the next school year will be very close to how people have experienced schools in the past. It is important to remember that COVID-19 is a mild self-limiting illness in children. The overwhelming majority of children have a mild self-limiting illness. The goal of pandemic control is to reduce severe illness and to reduce mortality and to get back to societal functioning. So the reason that COVID-19 vaccines were developed for adults and are being rolled out for adults is because it's a serious illness in adults.
All right, two-part question here from Lois asking about the when question, the when and where question. When can I get my vaccine and where? A couple of things. First of all, for the seniors that aren't in long-term care homes, they're looking for kind of a timeline, as is Lois, who's 88. When will I know when and where to go for my vaccines?
So again, I'm sorry, you're cutting a little bit in and out, so I'm going to do my best to answer the question. I believe the question was, when and where can people get their vaccines? And again, at the moment, we're still vaccinating people in our first group, and we are hearing every day about when new doses of vaccine are arriving. We are hoping to start, the original plan was to start the next phase in March, and at the moment we're still on track for that, but we need to keep really monitoring the arrival of vaccines. And as you heard, there is going to be a combination of large vaccination centers as well as outreach for people who aren't necessarily able to reach those centers, and people will be notified via a variety of means to let them know when they are going to be able to receive their vaccines. So please hold on for now. Information is going to come, and you will be notified when it is when vaccine is available for you. I know people want to know right now, and the planning is very much on the way. That's it.
Everyone's ready and waiting. Waldy says, my neighbor, who is 76, is expecting his daughter and her boyfriend, who both live in Whistler. Both have recovered from COVID-19, so we can generalize this a little bit. She wants to know if it's safe, if someone has had COVID-19, they've recovered, and then they're visiting someone who's elderly, perhaps.
Well, we certainly know. So again, we ask people to limit non-essential visits as much as possible. At the same time, people need to be, especially people who live alone, have a small number of people who are part of their core bubble. We know that we expect that people who have been infected with COVID-19, especially in the last 3 months, to have a degree of protection, and therefore their risk of getting COVID-19, of course, is much lower, and if that infection was recent, then a new infection is much less likely. Again, we don't know if a previous infection eliminates the possibility that you will get COVID again. In fact, we've had some reports of reinfections, but certainly people who have recovered from COVID-19, especially recently, are much less likely to be infected again.
Okay, let's get to a couple really quickly here. One from Florence. What complications could the vaccine pose for people with allergies? And Jim wants to know what the pink plastic thing is on the end of the needle.
Sorry, say that again. I'm not sure I understood that question.
It's okay. Why don't we just address the first one, complications for people with allergies from the vaccine?
With allergies?
Yes.
So people with allergies. So we do know that with vaccines there is a risk of allergic reaction, especially if you have an allergic reaction to a previous dose or to any of the components of the vaccine. However, the allergic reactions after vaccinations are very well managed in the immunization settings. So they are uncommon. In fact, they're rare. But when they do occur, we are prepared for them. So we have the medications necessary to treat allergic reactions, and we monitor people for at least 15 minutes in order to make sure that we can manage any allergic reaction. If you've had a serious allergy to a previous dose of COVID-19 or to any COVID-19 vaccine or to any of the components of a COVID-19 vaccine, you should not get the vaccine again. And that's if you've had an anaphylactic reaction to a component of the vaccine, but that's extremely rare. And mild allergic reactions, while they can occur, are not a contraindication to getting the vaccine. And if you should get a serious allergic reaction, we know how to manage it.
BC's Deputy Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Reka Gustafson, thank you so much for being live on our show tonight.
Well, this past year, practically every student has had to adapt to virtual learning, and that's true even for students of surgery.
But the solution in medical school is far more high-tech than a Zoom call.
David Common shows us how technology developed right here in Vancouver is training future surgeons.
Now, the things that I'm feeling for and listening for are the cortical chatter of the femur on the inner part of the femur.
No question, this is all a bit weird. The fusing of medicine and video games with faceless surgeons, their hands floating around a virtual patient.
And I'm going to line those up with the femur.
Orthopedic surgeon Danny Goyle is the medical mind behind the made-in-Canada invention called Precision OS.
I think the middle size is probably the correct one.
The virtual reality program is exploding in popularity, due in part to the restrictions of the pandemic.
And so if I'm happy there, I can pin this in place.
We learn a lot when we're in the operating room, and now that patients are not having surgery, learning has essentially ceased for a lot of the learners and surgeons around the world.
There are now fewer surgeries. With hospital resources stretched and redirected, surgical skills can, as a result, go stale. More than anything, it's been a loss for medical students. A problem that U of T Med School orthopedic surgery professor Peter Ferguson was facing head on, worried about his medical residents. And then along came a set of VR goggles.
Is it fun? It's a blast. It really is fun, yeah. I, in fact, fixed somebody's, a virtual patient's broken leg in my own living room, putting a metal pin in. And my wife said I looked sort of ridiculous doing it, but I was amazed at how realistic it was. And so at that point in time, I went to our faculty and I said, you know, this is something that we really have to get on board with.
His medical school bought a dozen of them, farmed them out to keep students learning.
And it's all no stakes, like they're not going to hurt a real patient. Yeah, exactly. That's a definite advantage. If we can decrease that incidence of complications by allowing these individuals to become more competent in this low-stakes environment, it will, theoretically improve patient outcomes.
I guess I've just inserted the nail into a femur, and you can take an X-ray to see your positioning.
Dr. Megan Shields is a third-year surgical resident and is still new to practicing using Precision OS, along with students from 22 other medical schools across North America.
Grabbing the guide wire.
What do you make of it so far?
It's a pretty impressive technology. I think it has a lot of potential to aid in learning.
Impressive, but not surprising. Coming from Vancouver's now firmly entrenched video game development scene.
Vancouver has really sort of led the charge on game development, film, and computer graphics. And I think that marriage between medicine and technology is unique to our city here. Just did a knee replacement.
A product of Vancouver scaled up in a pandemic and setting trends along the way. David Common, CBC News, Toronto.
It is 6:48 on this Tuesday evening. You're looking at a live shot downtown Victoria, getting ready for that true Arctic front. A special weather statement remains in place. Just how cold will it get? Well, Johanna has the answer coming up.
Non-birders might assume that winter is a time when all the birds have gone south, but you can bird anywhere, 365 days a year. I wanted to come to Halifax to take in the Great Backyard Bird Count, an annual 4-day event that engages birdwatchers all around the world to share their sightings to create a real-time snapshot of where the birds are and how many are showing up.
A couple American widgeons over there. Yeah, sometimes there's snow buntings and American pipits out here. So a purple sandpiper would be a lifer for you?
It would, yeah. I can't seem to ever be in the same place as one.
Anyone can participate in the bird count, from experts to beginners.
Good afternoon.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Paul Riss.
I'm Colleen. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Colleen.
Come on in, Paul.
Heard I was going to look at some birds out your back window.
Yes.
How's your turnout been for
Really
birds?
well.
Yeah?
Really
Good this
well.
year?
The pheasants are out, and
That'll be a different backyard bird for a lot of people.
there's 4 females and 3 males.
I see a bird on the ground. Look like a sparrow to me.
I thought I saw a pine siskin this morning as well.
Ah.
Every time I looked out the window, I wrote down what I saw, and I did it right up till 4:45 when it was starting to get dark, and I wrote down who I have to send it to in the end. I want to be a part of the big picture. I want to see the migration and who's coming and who's going. And sometimes we see birds that are just stopping to have a bite to eat and they're on their way somewhere else.
You guys look like birders.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Paul.
I'm Darla.
Darla, I heard you guys had a tufted duck kicking around here somewhere.
We do, over at Sullivan's Pond.
In Southern Ontario, a tufted duck is pretty rare.
Yeah. The reason I bird and why I think it's so important is I'm a police sergeant, and I find it a lot like detective work. You have to scope out the area, you have to do field notes, you have to identify things, and you have to follow leads in order to get to see what you want. And at any age, at any ability to do anything, you can bird. So we bird early in the morning. If I go on a vacation, I go birding. I just find it very enjoyable. It gets you outdoors, and we do it as a family adventure.
Yeah, that's a tufted duck. Ah, cool.
Isn't he beautiful?
Yeah. There he goes.
The males are so pretty.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool looking bird.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now. You are inside a lot warmer, I think, because I hear that it's getting really, really chilly outside.
Yeah, tonight is going to be, we keep saying this is the coldest night, but temperatures continue to drop. So this will be our coldest night yet. And I think we can say that for 2 more nights before we reach the peak of the cold air for the end of the week. Let me show you what the temperatures look like out there right now. They continue to drop. These are just the temperatures without the wind chill, hitting the freezing mark at YVR, and we're going to be dropping a few degrees at least below the freezing mark. I will talk more about temperatures, but I wanted to lay out The 3 possible snow events we've got going through to the weekend. Tomorrow morning, there is a chance that that system sliding down from the north will give us a quick shot of snow. I'll show you that in a moment. Better chance for those north of Highway 1. Thursday evening into Friday morning, a little system from Washington tries to punch north. I don't know if it's going to make it. Saturday into Sunday, this looks like a much more widespread event. So farther into the future, but more confidence that it's a bigger event. Okay, so here's System 1 moving down as we speak, pausing you tomorrow at 9 a.m. You can see the blue in the forecast across the south coast. We will get some snow. It's fast moving and it'll clear right back out to sunshine, in fact, before the end of the day. But a couple centimeters just in time for that commute is possible. Okay, taking you through Thursday, overnight into Friday. Watch this system from Washington try and punch up north of the border. I think this is a better shot in through the valley and out towards the mountain passes, but there's still a chance that could fill in from Victoria through to Vancouver. And letting this run right through to Saturday, you can see that Pacific system. That one is packing quite a bit of punch for the weekend. Tomorrow, lots of blue sky across the province. We haven't been getting a ton of mountain snow over the past week for the interior, but snow levels for the mountains still at or above normal snowpack for this time of the year. BC River Centre actually issuing an outlook today saying that spring flood forecast is high because of how much snow. So I'll be watching that in the weeks to come. But first, temperatures and snow are stories right now. We're just the freezing mark tomorrow, waking up to wind chills in the -16 range through the early morning hours. Thursday looks like a nice one, but look how cold those overnights are. Recovery for the weekend, but that is going to come with the event. There's not many events we can go to right now. So this is the event of the year, I think.
Oh, that's good. It sure looks a lot like winter, that's for certain.
Yep.
Thanks, Joe.
Yep. You're welcome.
And the cold, crisp Arctic air means a great opportunity to see some aurora borealis. The view from the prairies coming up.
I was flipping through, and Trout Lily is a plant I know well from childhood, and so I came across the entry and it said present in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, not present on PEI. Growing up, we spent a lot of time playing in the woods behind our house, and there's a lot of Trout Lily there, so I had remembered the look of the leaves and the plant, but also we did a plant project in grade 6. Well, the next spring, it was actually in June, and I was visiting my parents' house. I said, oh yeah, because this was months later. I said, oh, I should go look and see if it's there. Lo and behold, there was this very large area covered with these leaves.
Trout lily is a fairly easy to identify plant and relatively conspicuous. However, it only flowers early in the season, and the leaves disappear by mid-July. It seems like it probably is very localized on PEI, only in the Surrey area maybe, or Eastern Kings County.
I knew I had this flower in the plant project, so at my parents' place, Dad said, well, we must still have that. I don't think we would have tossed that out on you. So we went up to the attic and found the bin of Laura's stuff, and sure enough, the plant project was right in the bin, and there it was on page 8. Pressed Trout Lily from 1993.
Kevin McAdams' class, where his project, the plant project, occurred for many years. So we think it's likely that there are other plant collections out there, maybe up in parents' attics, that have additional records of Trout Lily. There are a lot of excellent amateur naturalists in the Maritimes that often have, professional level expertise. And we rely a lot on people like that for data.
It makes you feel like you're part of science and, just contributing to knowledge. I know it's a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but with science, every tiny little bit sort of builds up to this big body of knowledge. And so there's little joy to be taken in the small findings too.
Well, a silver lining for folks caught in the grips of an extreme cold snap in parts of the prairies.
They can catch a spectacular light show right outside their window in the night skies. Here's a look at the northern lights over Pine House Lake in Saskatchewan. While it may look like a time lapse, the stunning images were actually captured in real time.
Canada's northern latitudes and minimal light pollution make it optimal for viewing the dazzling display from autumn until late winter. You can check out this full video online on the CBC Saskatchewan Facebook page. It is pretty impressive.
Have you seen the Northern Lights in person?
Never like that, and no, and never in person. So
Me
there you
neither.
go. I'll go to Facebook right after.
Something to check off. Okay, that is it for our show tonight. You can always watch any of our newscasts anytime online, cbc.ca/BC.
Dan Burrett here at 11 o'clock right after the National. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.